bright, they think out of the box, they're not like everybody else I meet. That's the person I want running my department. I mean, it works that way across the board. So again, it's just something to keep in mind as we go forward. Yeah. Yeah.
So, David, when you're telling us this story, this journey,
Yeah.
right? It's not like you had a plan and you just followed step by step. Things kept happening, and
Yeah.
it went this way and that way, and then you are finally where you are, and this journey has obviously not ended.
Yeah.
It will continue. So, at those inflection points, when there is a turn or a twist on that journey, how do you either prepare for it, or how do you use it in a way that you can move to the next point?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because it's actually something that I probably still deal with. So a couple of examples of it. When I was leaving the DA's office, I knew I wanted to leave, but I can't just walk out right now. There's no job afterwards. And there's a wind down period to these things. But you've probably all been in that situation where you sort of made up your mind it's time to go or change, whether it's a work situation or, I don't know, relationship or whatever, right? And there's a little bit of an impatience that builds up, right? So there's the thing you want to do, and then there's just sort of the natural course of playing the game and the time of life and all that. Every time I've just sort of allowed myself to be a little more patient, right? And say, fine, I know what the trajectory is. I know where I need to go, but I accept the things I need to deal with right now. A door has always opened, right? I mean, without fail. The funny thing is I forget that time and time again, right? So one of the lessons is just remembering that once you make up your mind, right? I'm a firm believer that things begin to present themselves to support that. And it's happened for me across the board every way in ways that I wouldn't have thought. And that's the important thing, right? To be open to an idea, an opportunity that you might not think fits exactly what you had in mind, but is actually the perfect thing. So it comes back to patience, right? And I don't know how you prepare for that. I think experience is a big part of it. And so I think I'm going to continue to go through that in patience and maybe learn more and more from it and see it coming further. But I think as we all start out, it's going to blindside you, and you're going to get frustrated and upset and want to move, and you're not going to be able to because, again, the practicalities come in. You want to pay your rent until you know where the next check is coming from. So I really think it's a matter of patience. And 100%. 100%. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't mean to be too wishy-washy on it, but I don't think it's a wishy-washy thing. I think life, and especially as we're starting now and going through very uncharted territories, as you say, you can have a plan, and then you got to be in the moment to what's happening. To how one of the things they used to say about Napoleon was he was an amazing strategist, right? Brilliant military mind, but very flexible to what was happening on the battlefield, right? And I think you probably find this with great leaders in general. I don't know, take Steve Jobs, right? Vision, but there has to be a level of flexibility as to what is happening in the moment to achieve that. So that would be my answer to that. It's a great question, because look, alarms go off and you got to adapt, right? Yeah.
All right. So, it's very simple. According to your purpose, to where you want to go, how did you deal with the setbacks, with the failures that you encountered along your path?
I think sort of a similar answer. You'll learn they're not fatal. I mean, you'll just, listen, put business aside for a second. Think of any of the drama in our life where in that moment it seems fatalistic, right? It'll never get better, but it does. It passes, right? So there's two things. You learn that it's not fatal, that there's always another opportunity if you can walk and speak and talk and find access to water and food, we can, that's the blessing, right? Then you can go out the door in the morning and find the job, right? I'm talking very basic, how do I just move forward? You take the step and you move forward. So learn it's not fatalistic, and then taking action, right? The worst thing to do is, and listen, it's easier said than done. This comes from the experience of having been through it, right? And again, it's not just a work thing, it's a life thing, which I think we all have been through that, is then taking the step forward, right? You have to stay. So I had a friend who was out of work forever. And he was out of work because he's going to meetings and he would price himself way too high. And he had this idea of what he was worth, right? And nobody was offering that. And so that's really what you're worth. If nobody's offering that, you got to reevaluate it, right? But he was out of job for years. And, I knew his wife, and she was obviously frustrated. And we would always talk. And I said, listen, you have to tell him he's got to go get a job today at Starbucks somewhere. You have to be in motion, right? You have to be out there. You have to be engaging. You have to keep your mind and attention and intelligence out. As soon as you let that overwhelm you, and really that's what they call sort of depression, right? As soon as you let it make you static, then it's very tough to move from that, right? So that's the theory, right? And I think we know that from experience, but even right now, I face things all the time I want to do with the company that keep back and forth. I can do them, then I can't do them, can do them, and it's very frustrating, right? But you keep moving forward. You keep moving forward. And I know we hear that a lot, but it's very, very true. You'll find that if you stay active, and it may not be work, but again, doing something you love, but as long as you don't stay idle, a lot of inner resources come up, internally I mean, to make you feel better and make you realize, man, I'm much more confident, I'm much more capable than this thing that's happening to me right now, which will pass soon enough. Because I think when those things happen, we immediately feel like we have a lack of resources, that we're smaller than the thing, that we're overwhelmed, But if we stay active, we suddenly feel that's not true, and then we find the strength to pull through it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is not for the thing, I was just
No,
thinking.
off the record.
What you're saying is so true, is that we have to be dynamic, we have to move, even when it's not going in our favor, because I feel like this is not metaphysics, but
Yeah.
you draw energy. When we're moving, there's a certain kind of energy. So you start doing something, and as if then doors start opening.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you don't do anything, then the doors are also closed.
Absolutely. I broke my Achilles. I didn't break. I guess you tear your Achilles heel. I tore it one time, and I was I was out of the city, and I began to think, well, how am I going to get the subway and all this, right? And there was a point where, just as you said, I sort of said, you know what? I'm not worrying about it. I'm just going to wait until the issue comes up instead of sort of worrying right now and ruining my weekend. And I never had an issue. Anytime I needed a ride presented itself. I needed a taxi came up. And part of it is, you could say, it's luck or whatnot, but I think there is something to just being open, right? One of my favorite quotes is, and it took me a while to find out what it means, is from Shakespeare. There's more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our imaginations, right? I didn't really know what that meant. And at least what it means for me now is the reality that what's happening now is always so much more interesting and full of so much more possibilities than what we think about what's happening now, right? So you have a class coming up or a test or a meeting or something, and you go through this whole projection of what's going to happen, right? Or you meet somebody and you have all these ideas about them. But when you put all that aside and you just show up without any of that, it's infinitely interesting, right? And I think that's sort of what you're talking about, right? Not to get wrapped up in the dream and the fear and the worry of, I can't believe this happened, right? But to come out of that.
Also, the other thing that you spoke about was, at each point, in the beginning. So there was this first job, which was, yeah, I've come out of the marketing and sales degree.
Right.
Here's a friend, let's start marketing.
Right, right.
Like, this is it. Okay, so then the next job is, I have, technology is happening. Let's get into technology.
Right.
Okay, or, hey, coffee is becoming big, let's try our hands on coffee.
Yeah.
So, but there is something there to it, which is to be able to see what's becoming big, what's the trend which is presented to you. Because I think if we catch on to a trend, you can ride the wave.
Yeah,
Little
yeah.
bit. I mean, so I think for all of us also to be aware of the market realities and where they're going. If we are aware, and we are kind of keeping an eye and saying, forensic accounting is becoming big. This could be a new way to go.
Yeah.
There might be something there as well.
Yeah, no, and if you look at, anybody watch the Shark Tank, that show, the Shark Tank? I love that show. I think it's great. I think it's one of the most educational shows on TV. But what's so interesting about it is, they're really well versed in what's happening, right? They know the landscape, right? And this goes back to never stop learning, right? And again, it's, there's one level where you could say, let me find the trend. So, maybe you're into tech, so let me find that. Sometimes things just get presented to you and you go with that. But it's really impressive when you see people who just understand at least what things mean, right? So now that the rise of this technology, what does it mean sort of overall where are we going as a society, right? And that goes to technology, to biotech, to sustainable farming, to criminal law. I mean, all those things, right? Even the whole debate right now about them rewriting convention rules, right? It's just very interesting, right? Nobody knows, it's a huge topic now which nobody ever thought about, but now sort of convention or election law is now a huge topic, right? So again, it just goes back to never stop. You don't have to be a master of it. You're not going to be a master of everything. But you can be informed enough to understand, again, those ebbs and flows and where society goes and what they're finding important. There's certain things I will I've sort of missed the boat on, let's say, social media stuff. I get it. I get what it's about, right? But there's a whole generation of people coming up with that in their DNA who understand it in a way that I never will. And I don't mean that like, oh, they're just young kids. I mean, they really understand how that will influence and affect and move people. And I find that phenomenal, right? It's like me looking at modern art, right? Where I can appreciate it on one level, but there's people who can look at that and know what that means in context of 50 years of modern art. And that's pretty cool, right? So I think it's a great point. It's a great point.
And I think there's another theme there of your comfort with risk and failure. And I think when, you get to a certain point, that becomes such a debilitating thing for some people. And so, just listening to your story, I guess the way that things happen, it seems that you were very comfortable with that risk of failure or just not having something work out.
Yeah, and again, that's why I think also I speak a little bit from the entrepreneurial standpoint, which is not for everybody and doesn't have to be for everybody. I speak to a lot of people who just say, no, I want a job, I know where to go, and perfect, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not in my nature. I like to sort of create that, and like you said, there's something interesting about it. But I think in any situation, no matter if the job, if you're working for somebody in a big company, there's going to be failures, right? And so I think the lesson applies all the time. Yeah.
And they say that, it used to be that people would have one career and they would stay in
Right.
that career. But the story now is that people will change their careers like 7 or 8 times in their lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to be entrepreneurs for ourselves,
Yeah.
to be able to make those shifts.
And now's really the greatest time to do that. The playing field in one way is so level, right? Just the internet has done that. The web has done that, right? Anybody can start something and the whole world could see it. It's obviously not that easy, but the playing field is level. You can research anybody you want, any company. The information is much more. So you go into an interview, you're infinitely more equipped now than you were 10 years ago, right? From LinkedIn to all these sorts of things. And it's a phenomenal tool, and it's great. Yeah.
I think one thing you kind of touched upon, the depression or the psychology
Yeah.
of making that first step when you're stuck, And I think for some of us that are a little more experienced, we have this kind of wealth of experience and knowledge to draw
Right.
on. When you're first starting out, you might have been told this 100 times, but until you go through it enough, I feel like it's probably one of the most difficult things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's associated just with experience, but maybe just self-confidence. And so for our students, it would be interesting if there's something we could say or do to speed up that process of, it's gonna be all right, no matter how difficult it looks, it's not gonna be fatal, like you said, and to take that first step, and once you get an emotion, and then you get the psychology of that,
Yeah.
and the energy of that. But making that first step, especially if you are depressed and you're going through a very difficult time,